August 19th, 2033, 5:53 a.m. Entry. My name is James Thatcher, and I will soon become the first person to leave this earth for another, to travel through the multiverse. I won't go into explicit detail, too much mathematical complexity to transcribe in a simple text. To put it basically, I've discovered a method for punching a temporary hole through the wall of space-time, allowing me to jump onto another world. A variation of this one. Whether that variation I land on be subtle or drastic, I have no way of controlling. It'll be like a roulette wheel with near infinite slots, and I will be the marble. Luckily, a window will remain open for a short time, about 24 hours, that will allow me to return home. I will make the jump at 6:30 a.m. Pacific time, and where I end up, heaven only knows. August 19th, 2033, 10 a.m. Entry. Irony, sweet irony. Of all the worlds I could have landed on, it was this one. A world where the very possession of the technology I used to get here is outlawed. Granted, it is for a good reason from what I've learned of this world's history. Apparently, pan-dimensional travel was invented all the way back in the late 1960s on this Earth, and the naive scientists who invented it gave the secrets of the technology to every world they came across. Unsurprisingly, this allowed criminals, terrorists, and radicals of all sorts and walks of life to get a fresh start on parallel worlds, including this one. This resulted in chaos the likes of which was rarely seen on Earth Prime, and eventually the majority of nations, as well as the UN, banned the construction, possession, and use of all pan-dimensional travel apparatuses. I tried to explain to the officers who arrested me how this was a huge mistake, how I hadn't purposely come here, how it was all random chance. They wouldn't hear it. Apparently that excuse has been made countless times before, and it wasn't going to work this time. They confiscated my particle oscillator, but allowed me to keep this journal and my pen. According to them, I'm going to be behind bars for a long time. I have to get out of here by 6:30 a.m. tomorrow morning, or I'll never get home. August 20th, 2033, 6:45 a.m. Entry. I'm home. I made it. One of the detectives at the police station, at risk of losing her job, believed me. She let me out while the others were sent on calls, some of which she herself had orchestrated. That was at around 6:15 a.m., and I ran. I ran as far from the police station as I could, almost to the other side of town before I activated the device. I wanted to get as far from the authorities as possible. Not that I ever plan on coming back. The wormhole opened, sucked me in like a vacuum cleaner, and had me land flat on my face in a gravel alleyway. My wife was happy to see that I'd made it home, and I couldn't disagree. Sadly, I'd forgotten to take a video camera of any sort, so I had no proof of my journey. Of that I could care less. I proved it to myself. That's all that matters. I may not need to use this for a while. September 1st, 2033, 12 p.m. Entry. I should have known. I should have known. I just checked the timestamp of my return. I arrived at exactly 6:31 a.m. I was 1 minute late, A mere 60 seconds. The differences were so subtle. I found myself dismissing them one after the other. It started the morning after I arrived, when my wife packed me a lunch for my day at the lab. I was too preoccupied with trying to come up with a good excuse for the prior day's absence. It wasn't like I could tell my coworkers that I'd spent the day in a jail cell in a parallel universe. I didn't have time to ask what she'd packed me. It ended up being a ham sandwich. That was the first change. She knew I hated ham. Of course, as you might expect, this was rather easy to overlook. We'd both had a long night. She probably just grabbed the ham instead of turkey, and it wasn't that big of a deal anyway. There was a Wendy's right down the road, and I had an hour for lunch, so I soon forgot about it. The second change came a few days later, when we had a little late-night get-together with a few friends. No special occasion, just an excuse to hang out on our lavish back porch. We sat around, talked, had our fair share of Coke and Pepsi. None of us were fans of alcohol. Eventually, we found ourselves in a bit of a improvised game of trivia. We were all well read enough to know more than enough seemingly useless facts. It was between me and one of my friends, and we'll call him Ryan. My wife asked us a rather easy question, for us anyway. What Stephen King novel was delivered by the chapter over the internet and left incomplete? I thought I knew the answer. The Plant, I said confidently. Everyone looked at me. Are you okay? Stephanie, one of the other attendees, asked me, her brow raised. Yeah, why? I said with a laugh. She ran into the house and came out with a large book. I would have guessed 500 pages. On the front was The Plant by Stephen King, with the same concept cover I have seen countless times. That migraine must have really messed you up. That book is basically enshrined on your shelf. You probably read that more times than any other, she said, reminding me of the excuse I had made up earlier. Then what was the answer? I asked, now confused myself. Dreamcatcher, of course, she replied. Now that, I knew wasn't right. I may not have read every one of his books in my lifetime, but I knew Dreamcatcher was a fully complete King novel, one that many people panned for reasons I didn't know, seeing as I hadn't read it. Still shaken, I played it off as exhaustion, mistaken memory, and the like. They all seemed to buy it, and the remainder of the night passed uneventfully. All of us soon letting the moment pass. The first event even I could excuse. The second event got me thinking. But it was the third event that had me certain. It happened just last Sunday, during the second service at Portland Christian Center. The worship had just finished, the songs and praise had been sung, and our lead pastor Ray Noah took to the altar. Now, while I know you love it when I stand here and talk for 45 minutes, hoping that you're actually listening and not just looking at your phones, he said, taking a pause with a sly smile, allowing a small wave of laughter to settle over the pews. Whether that laughter was genuine, as for me it was, I couldn't be certain. We have a speaker present, and I'd hate to take up his time. You may know him as the author of books such as Repentance, How to Come to Christ Even in the Hardest Times, and Two Views Collide, How Science and the Bible Converge. He is a good man of God, ladies and gentlemen. Please help me welcome Stephen Hawking. I jumped in shock, clapping half-heartedly as the unmistakable Hawking himself drove up in his wheelchair.
"Hello. Can you hear me?"
his computer asked on his behalf. He then went on talking about how we can talk to the unreached, how we can make our faith not the most awkward conversation in existence. I knew this wasn't right. Sure, a lot can happen in 24 hours, but last I checked, Stephen Hawking was a hardcore atheist, and arguably an anti-theist. He may have accepted Christ while I was on another world for sure, but he certainly couldn't have written so many books about faith and spirituality in that time. It was then that I decided to check the timestamp on the oscillator and realized that I had missed my window, however small the margin. I debated for a few hours whether or not to stay on this world. Sure, it was different, but it was close enough that I could live with it. I could just tell my wife, or rather this version of my wife, to pack turkey instead. No big deal there. I could get behind reading this book that my world lay incomplete, and I couldn't see one of the smartest men on earth being religious as a bad thing. I could address my other differences as they came along. But two pieces of information led me to my decision. One, my wife, my version of my wife anyways, was waiting for me to come home. And two, even if I decided to stay, there's the chance that this world's version of me could return, and that situation would be just too bizarre to consider facing. I had to leave. Needless to say, my wife, whom for the sake of clarity I will refer to as my alternate wife, didn't take the news well. At first she thought I was lying, or mistaken, or delusional. Then she realized I was telling the truth. She could see it in my eyes. I didn't want to leave. What were the chances of ever finding another world this similar to my own? But I had to. Your version of me is out there somewhere, probably lost, confused, and worried as I am, I said, hoping and praying that he was in fact alive. He'll come back someday, I'm sure of it, or some other version may come along. Heaven knows what I've released. That got her to laugh a little, only a little, tears still welling in her eyes. I embraced her and gave her a brief and reserved kiss. She was technically married to another man, after all. She let me go and stood back as I opened the vortex on the quiet driveway. I jumped head on and flew into the infinite. I have the rest of my life to keep jumping. No more 24-hour windows. And now, the world I landed on isn't at all ideal. Don't get me wrong. It has restaurants, hotels, and hospitals if I need them. The cities are vast and advanced, several decades ahead of my own. I just can't get over one thing. The flag that flies. A combination of two historical evils. Stars and bars, centered on a swastika.